So, Nolan, thank you so much for being a part of this project.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, I want to. I always start these very straightforward. Where did you grow up, and what was the night sky like when you were growing up?
Yep. So I grew up in Baltimore, and for me, the night sky was always blocked because I was in a city with buildings. So the glimpses that I would get of the sky were frankly trickles. It wasn't the overwhelming thing that I saw, and living in the city, wasn't always clear, right? So it was dirty, it was fog, it was, toxic, it was all of those things. So um, but when I did see it every now and again, it just amazed me, right? Because I lived on a block that, it's funny, anyone who knows anything about Baltimore City, the people who live on the east side of Baltimore don't go to the west side, and the people who live on the west side don't go to the east side, and neither of them go to the county, which is only 15 minutes away. So it's an isolated kind of life. But when you live in isolation, you're always looking for a glimmer of hope. And every now and again, when I would see that glimmer of hope, that was a part of my rearing and growing up.
So, I'm kind of curious. Was it a like were you seeing glimpses of the moon and thinking, someone was there one time, or was it seeing stars and you had a favorite constellation? Tell me a little bit more.
It was it was really interesting. It was glimpses of the moon, it was glimpses of stars, and it was the thought that there must be more, right? What that represented to me was there must be more. And um, it was so far away, but so close. For me, the sky was way closer than the people that I saw on television. The sky was way closer than any famous person or famous actor or famous person that I heard on the radio, because it was there every night. I saw it consistently, and it never moved, and it was never subject to television channel, or it wasn't subject to a certain period of time during the night, or you got to wait until next Thursday for it to come back on. So for me, that was kind of this really interesting thing. And now when I look back at it, you never know what gives a child hope until that child becomes an adult and understands what hope actually is. So now I recognize what that is. I recognize that small, minuscule vision to the sky gave me the kind of hope that said there's something bigger than anything that I've ever seen or experienced, and frankly, than anyone in my family has ever seen or experienced. I mean, I'm that kind of quintessential kid of my generation. I'm the first to go to college, and certainly the first to have a master's or a law degree. So I'm the first to ever leave Baltimore. So imagine growing in that space and looking to the sky for that hope, knowing that there's a bigger place, but being surrounded by love. But there's only so much that love can do. Love can't transport you to the hope that you're looking for, but something like the moon and the stars and those things, and understanding that there's a far greater thing out there than just your block. I mean, it had always been an interesting thing. And as I get older, the retrospective gets stronger, because I then start to think about why I think the way that I think about the things that I think. And that's why, space is really important to me. And I'm sure we'll get a little deeper, but yeah, that was kind of like growing up for me, and how it started.
Well, so you mentioned kind of like the space was always there versus like a television or anything like that. Was there, in conjunction with these occasional glimpses of the night sky, was there a work of fiction or a science program or something like that that was also inspiring you in terms of like to learn more, or tell a little bit more?
Absolutely. So for me, it was always Star Wars. It was all of those things. Just it's funny how you get transported from a reality to a new reality. So for me, Star Wars and watching television where there was science fiction that was on, like, the Swiss Family Robinson, like all of those things for me were amazing. Let me just say this: they were amazing in two ways. amazing in that they transported me away and they made me think about other worlds and other universes. But it was also amazing to me in a way that, you know, I didn't really see an African American person in Star Wars until we see Billy D. Williams as Lando Calrissian. And then I'm like, oh, damn, we're in space too. I'm like, oh, now this like that. So, you know, again,
Yeah.
that kind of thing is a very real thing. So you fall in love with this thing in the early 70s that is Star Wars, and you have everything. My mother still to this day has my original Star Wars sheets. Like it's just, and again, you see I'm in a purple room. This is what she's done for my son who's now in college. So he has a Ravens room. She is the person that would save Star Wars sheets from a child. But it gave me that opportunity to see what wasn't actually there, but also to experience, you know, what the possibility was. Because I would always think when I would see things like that, when I would see kind of science fiction, my thought was always, wow, someone imagined this. I bet it's happening somewhere. So when I see a Star Wars, it wasn't for me, it wasn't a so far off that it isn't happening somewhere. It was this has got to be happening somewhere. This is got, like, this life has to be, you know. So for me, it was one of those, again, just a glimmer of hope, just a glimmer of there's more than just what I see around me. So yeah, so I mean, really watching things like Star Wars, watching Swiss Family Robinson, watching Doctor Who, all of these, and also watching some things that were, I've been this old soul that have been, you know, that came out in the 30s and in the 20s, like watching old science fiction and those things. It was always amazing to me. We knew that these were B movies, and we knew that it was so, like when Ed Wood came out, I was like, yes, that was my childhood right there, watching all of these old science fiction movies that were horrible, but you loved them at that time. So science fiction was always huge for me, just in terms of kind of transporting me from the box that I lived in, but giving me the opportunity to see the creativity that exists in the minds of those who are out there, who see things that I may not ever see, but are bringing something to me that gives me, there is a space that's out there. And in space, the Earth is a part of space, but it's not the only part of space. So there's something else out there. So those are the kinds of things that really interested me. And the other thing that I'll say, but here's what my mother knew. My mother knew that a little Black boy in Baltimore City would have a really hard time getting a great education. So she did what any mother who cares more about her child than she does about anything else in her well-being. So she used a relative's address out in the county, out in Howard County, so that I could actually go to school. Because she knew that if I was going to school in Baltimore City, all bets were off. It was a statistic waiting to happen. And what that transportation did for me was it actually put me in a school system where when I got to middle school, in my middle school was a planetarium. Now, I'd never heard of the word planetarium before. I didn't even know I was like, a planetarium, what the hell, what is a planetarium? So again, Black kid, poor neighborhood, all of those things. Mother makes a decision. He can't get a great education here. We're going to make sure that he gets an education. Again, never gone to college herself, knew what she didn't know, but knew that there was a place for me to get it. And that's all she really cared about. And I wind up going to this school, Patapsco Middle School. I'll never forget it. We're in the middle of the school. And again, this is in Howard County, largely white community, very affluent. I mean, this is one of the more wealthy counties in the country, quite frankly. So I go to this school, Patapsco Middle School, and I get there, and there's this big round thing in the middle of the damn school. And I'm like, what is that? I'm a kid. I'm like, what is that? So my science teacher says, well, that's the planetarium. I didn't know what a planetarium was. So on a Wednesday, we get our opportunity to go to the planetarium. And I am in this planetarium where the seats kind of lean back, and there's stars shooting all over the place. There's moons, there's Saturn, there's Mars, there's Uranus. There is there is a new universal existence that now sits on me that I was like, damn it, I knew there was something else out there. I knew it. I knew it. So for me, one of the biggest things about then going to school was it was great to get an education, but seeing that planetarium every day that I went into middle school gave me the ability to think, I knew that there was something bigger. And now I'm seeing it. Now I'm in this space where I can actually see the distance of Earth from Mars, the distance, the rings around Saturn, even Pluto. God bless Pluto's heart now that it's been reduced. God bless Pluto. I still love Pluto. Damn it, I'm of the mindset that Pluto's a real thing. Neil deGrasse Tyson, go to hell. So, but the point is, I wind up getting transported from my reality because, again, I may be going to school here. That's not where I live. So I get a chance to be transported from my day-to-day reality into a school that is, extremely focused on education, but also extremely focused on creating these opportunities for the children of that school that just far outweighed anything that I could have imagined. So that planetarium was a game changer for me. So when the question about my love for space and where it came from, it went from a slight glimpse of a star in the moon in Baltimore City to a planetarium that said, well, this is Orion. And over here, if you look at the belt right here, like really being able to understand the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper, being able to think about constellations and being able to then want to go see those things outside when you really see them. It blew my mind because I then began to think, well, we all have that same opportunity. This thing is so damn big that no one can own it all. So there's got to be a way to have your own piece of this thing. And that's what it did for me. That's what space absolutely did for me. And that's why, and I'm sure we'll get into other things about what I've done, but that's why even what I've done throughout my career, being so much a grassroots in the community person, why space is so incredibly important, because the barriers that I've worked on for people in cities across the nation, that's just the first level. The largest barrier is the mental barrier. And the way you break a mental barrier is being able to show and expose someone to something that's way bigger than anything that they've ever seen. And I'm not telling you what I heard on this one. I'm telling you what I know, because that's why I'm sitting here having this conversation with you.
I mean, I love that you remember the day of the week that it was on those Wednesdays.
That's right.
Wednesdays. Well, so then let's get into this, because you have had, because we know each other for a while, you have had this career where you have spread that, you mentioned is like, all right, there is more, like that glimpse of more. So maybe you can then go as like, okay, from that kid sitting lean back in the planetarium seats, how does that go then from that to what has now been a very successful career in giving kids all across the country that little glimpse of more? Like, what were your then next steps, and how did you kind of carry that torch?
Yeah. So what then happened for me was really, I began to, over time, understand what gift the universe has given me. And it's pretty simple. The universe has given me the gift to be able to take complex things, simplify them, and communicate them to almost anyone in any way, shape, or form. Now, when you understand that kind of gift, you actually begin to think about the world a bit differently. So what I then did, I wound up going to undergrad, have a degree in public administration and economics, grad school, and then law school. But when I went to law school, I actually focused on both the Constitution and contracts. Again, because I'm thinking about what are the biggest problems that folks who come from where I come from have: resources and rights. So I've always thought resources and rights. So always thinking resources and rights, I'm always thinking, how can I take this gift that I have and push an agenda around resource and rights for individuals. And the way that this actually connects to space is because the bigger I can make the conversation, the more likely I can get people to say, oh, these are just human rights that we're talking about here, right? These are just basic human rights. So it's really difficult for a person to say, you shouldn't be able to get this great education here, or you shouldn't have job access and opportunities, or little Black kids or little Latino kids in this particular part of the area shouldn't have the best, because now these are just human rights, particularly when we're having conversations about space, right? Right? We're having these conversations about things that are so much bigger than what's happening here. And my argument would always be, if we could start the world from the beginning, would we start it the way that we started it before? And everyone's answer is no. We would actually do it much differently. So for me, it's always been, so now if we have an opportunity to think about the world differently and we're thinking about space, why wouldn't we create the space that is the right space for humanity with all that we've learned, right? So when I'm talking to my friends in the space, in the space industry, and even in the civil rights industry, because I actually don't think the distance between the two is far. I actually think the distance is very close, because it's all about humanity. It's all about, how do we actually create a more human-centered system that actually thrives off of everyone having the greatest opportunity, the greatest potential to actually do what it is that they're supposed to do, and then letting them roll up their sleeves and go do that work. So when I think about kind of space and I think about that journey, so that journey meant for me, how do I take that gift and actually do something with it? And what winds up happening is I wind up, thankfully being connected to the Urban League, which is an organization that is so incredibly, it's so compatible to kind of my thinking and my skill set, that it was just a tremendous ride. So I wind up, after law school, becoming the president of the National Urban League Young Professionals. I have 67 chapters around the nation, 10,000 members. I sit on the National Urban League's board. They then say to me, hey, we've been training you for some time. We want to see if we can make you a CEO of one of our urban leagues around the nation. They came to me with a group of urban leagues, and I was like, I don't want to go to any of those places. So then they came back to me and said, well, what do you think about New Orleans? And this is post-Katrina. I was like, that's exactly where I want to go. I want to go build something. I actually want to go be able to say, in this time, the work that I did made a difference because it was measured and it could be done. So literally 2007, I wind up going down to New Orleans to rebuild the Urban League there. Again, the way that this connects to space is because when you look at a place like New Orleans is very much like Baltimore. And I'll never forget the day that there was a great big festival downtown in Baltimore, and it was on a Thursday. And there were a group of people who actually were displaced because of Hurricane Katrina, and then they moved to Baltimore. So I was working at the Urban League in Baltimore, and we helped them to get housing and we helped them to get jobs. And a group of them, I let them know, hey, I'm going to take this job down in New Orleans. And they said to me, hey, we thank you for going to our city, but we're never going back. Now, these people are living in Baltimore City. They have a place in Baltimore City now, and they have they're working about, this is Baltimore City. This is one of the highest per capita murder rates in the world. But for them to say to me, thank you, but we're never going back, it was one of the ways the universe was saying, I need you to understand what you're about to go into. So getting down to New Orleans was really this opportunity for me to push this agenda around opportunity in a way that it just hadn't been pushed before. Because frankly, the way that classism and racism exist in New Orleans, it's extra special. It exists with gumbo, it exists with jazz, and it exists in a way that the attempt to make it feel the attempt to make it feel not so real is through its culture. Like, New Orleans has a PhD in culture, but when it comes to racism and economic opportunity for people there, oh, it's terrible. So for me, it was pushing an agenda around opportunity. And it was pushing that agenda around, the world is bigger than just what's happening here in New Orleans. And let's talk about what that looks like, right? So let's take a group of kids to the planetarium in Baton Rouge. Let's take again, because these are, for me, these are experiences that I've had that changed my trajectory as a child, that I know for a fact can change the trajectory of another child who the marketplace in New Orleans only wants them to have a trumpet in their hand. I want them to have a magnifying glass. I want them to have a telescope. I want them to be preparing to actually fly on the next space station, they'll be a part of the next space station. That's what I want. And they can play a trumpet at the same time. They can do both of those. They are not mutually exclusive. And I think what inevitably happens is sometimes we find ourselves in a space where the marketplace loves a specific skill set that we have, and it will harvest and cultivate that skill set and only want you to do that. So for me, I actually think humanity is multifaceted in its ability to do things, but we never explore multiple things because people aren't pushing us to think multiple things. So when I'm working with kids or parents in New Orleans and building the Urban League, we're talking about things beyond, just a job or beyond just education. We're talking about the tax code and how we can use the tax code to help rebuild areas in New Orleans. We're talking about outer space and how space is going to be the new frontier. We're thinking about STEM and making sure that kids are actually really thinking about science, math, and technology in a real way. So, it's been a really interesting opportunity for me, again, to take that little glimmer of space to that planetarium, to just a catastrophe in New Orleans, and then spread that with a group of people who have just never seen and or thought about it before. So that's some of it. I know that's a long-winded way of getting.
No, but that's wonderful. So I love this idea where it's a commonality between, there is a certain narrative around space, at least these days, now that we're in this new space race where space is kind of seen as, in some quarters as like the domain of the billionaires, the domain of, only the people that can afford like, private rocket launches or things like that. But what you're saying is like, you're like, no, you get a kid into a planetarium because then they can kind of see a glimpse of the cosmos. And I'm curious, so, I mean, you were setting these things up for years and, running these things for years. I'm curious, have you since kind of seen the impacts of those kids that first went through these planetariums? I'm curious because like you've really impacted so many people's lives, and have you seen the fruit, the trees start to bear fruit, so to speak?
Yeah, the answer is yes. So, it's funny. I mentioned to you a little earlier that my son is in his freshman year of college at Jackson State now. And I went and I literally took him down there, and I'm there. And then this kid says, "Mr. Rollins." It's like, I'm in Mississippi. I've never been in, like, this is the first time. So it turns out that it's a young child who was in a family in New Orleans who we actually helped them around. It was really interesting. So a lot of the people that we work with, they actually needed access to resources for housing. They needed refrigerators. They needed but they also needed access to educational programming. This young kid was actually one of the kids who I knew this kid was special, but you never know how special they are. And this kid just had a really interesting mind. So I wound up connecting this kid with an engineer at Tulane University. And this engineer helps this young child to get into all kinds of space camps and engineering camps and those. This kid is now at Jackson State University majoring in mechanical engineering.
Excellent.
So it's a very, and again, at this point, God, he had to have been, he couldn't have been more than 9 at that point. He couldn't have been more than 9, and he's a sophomore now. So, for me, that was one example, but the beauty of it is if I never hear another example like that again, I'm still going to be okay, because I actually know the impact of the work, not just me, but all of the people who have been working with me through my work in New Orleans, through my work in LA, through my work in Baltimore. Like, I know there's no one could convince me otherwise that that work has not changed completely, if nothing else, the thinking of both parents and children in terms of the opportunity. And candidly, some of the banging changed the thinking and the thought process of business leadership and political leadership in these cities and states. So yeah, very specific. And this just, what I just described to you just happened. So it just happened last summer. It happened it happened August of last year when I got this call, because I was taking my son down there to school. So there's a prime example of if you just, man, all you got to do is give folks an opportunity. Like, everyone won't take it, but somebody's going to take it. And when I think about space, I do get this concern that space, in some respects right now, space needs a better PR person, because you're right. Like, it is like space's PR person is pretty shitty right now, because it feels it's the way that the PR is spinning around it. It feels very colonizer-y. And I think that's the thing we've got to be careful of, because we've seen that show before. Like, we've seen that play, but we know how that play goes. We know how it works out. We know that resources wind up,
Oh, I seem to have lost you, Nolan. Are you still there? Oh, you dropped out for a second. Sorry.
Okay.
Past 30 seconds, I did not get.
Okay. All right. So what I was saying was, I was saying that, the space race absolutely needs a better PR. Like the PR is trash, because what it feels like is space really feels colonizer-y. It feels and sounds a lot like a show that we've already seen. Like, we know what colonizing looks like and what it sounds like and what its outcome actually is. And what concerns me about this terrible PR about it is that it feels like, listen, propaganda winds up becoming the truth, right? Propaganda becomes prophecy, because prophecy is all about us being able to say, this is what the leader is, this is who should be in charge, this is who. And once you say it long and loud enough, whether it was true in the beginning or not, it becomes true. So for me, the better we are at saying, no, when you think about space, we need everything from communication to whatever. We need everything there. We then start to think about space more from a human development standpoint and what's necessary, and thinking about what opportunities actually really exist there. Because at this point, I love the stories of, right, the first woman going into space, or the first Latino astronaut. Like, but at some point, when are we going to get to the place where we're not talking about the first any longer, and we're developing pipelines that actually are developing the kinds of minds that it's not about the first, it's about how do we get as many people in here as possible, because we need more thinking. We need more thinking. Like, we need the kind of resources that can be harvested from space. We know this, but I mean, we've already seen the cell phone. We've already seen GPS. Imagine the ingenuity that a child who has been able to traverse some of the toughest spaces. I don't care if it's in Nigeria. I don't care if it's in Spain. The toughest, being able to navigate those spaces in a very real way. Imagine giving that same child an opportunity to figure out a space challenge and or problem, right? Imagine that kind of thing. So I think that we've got to be really intentional about how we are making space accessible. And I'll be honest with you, that's why conversations like this are important. That's why how you've built Small Steps is really important, because you don't just have space people around the table. right? You have people who love space, who understand space, who connect in ways that we're all a part of this greater tapestry. That's the important part. And I think that's what's important. What's important is that the universe, that the marketplace sees groups like this coming together to solve a problem, even if that problem is we want to make space accessible, at least to them, if nothing else, to the minds of people who don't have access to it, who think it's far away. So I think, space definitely needs to fire its PR team unless this is what it actually wants, and being less tongue in cheek, and or initiatives like this and this kind of work has to be the lifeblood of what next looks like for us. I mean, it's got to be, because what you're doing is you're forcing conversations about humanity while we're forcing conversations about technology. And I just fundamentally feel that if we can inject all aspects of humanity into how we're building technology doesn't become an afterthought, right? Someone asked me to take a survey the other day about people who are differently able, and I believe it's Apple actually developing some apps and things like that for people who are differently able. And I was taking this survey and I kind of said to myself, it'd have been really cool when you were developing the platform to have someone who was differently able there, so that you wouldn't have to wait 20 years to actually have this conversation to make it more accessible. Mm-hmm. The plausible deniability is gone. We no longer have plausible deniability in humanity. Like, we just don't. Like, we can pretend, it's incremental. And, I have this fundamental feeling that, that a part of the challenge with the American dream is that it's incremental for some people, right? So the American dream for some is automatic. For others, it's incremental. You'll get this little piece of a right, you'll get that. Well, we don't think you should have that. This, in order for us to be what it is that we say we are, opportunity can't be incremental. Opportunity has to go to those who are willing to work for it. That's it. That should be the only litmus test. Zip code shouldn't be the litmus test. None of that should be the litmus test. So I think the interesting opportunity that we have with what's happening with space is to do that, is to do it from the beginning. And shame on us if we aren't pushing an agenda around doing that from the beginning, because we actually know what the outcome is going to be. We actually know what it's going. It's funny. I was on a panel in New York a few weeks ago, maybe about a month and a half ago, and our panel was about space and what do we think is necessary in space. And the panel before ours was about cities and the challenges that cities are having. And one of the things that I said, listen, if we don't do what we need to do to make sure that space is open and inclusive, we are actually going to have a conversation 50 years from now that sounds a lot like that cities conversation that was just being had about how terrible cities are, how many challenges cities are having, from trash to education to deplorable living conditions. We're going to have that conversation. So there's no better juxtaposition between where we are and where we could be and how we can use that learning to build where we want to go than that. And for me, that in a nutshell is the game. Like, if humanity is anything, it should be learned in terms of its experience, and then use those experiences to create opportunity for others.
Well, and that I love that you like put those parallels as directly, because yes, if we don't fix our mindset, if we don't fix the systems that we're bringing up to space, we're just going to clone it. It'll be the rough areas that you and I have both been in, just happen to be on Mars or happen to be on the moon, but that doesn't mean they aren't rough neighborhoods. So we want to make sure that we aren't cloning the inequalities, cloning the disparities from Earth as we try and bring the good things, the culture, the vibrancy of life, etc. One of the things I'm trying to do with this project is have it be a resource for people, anywhere in the world, to kind of see what other people's experiences are. And one of my standard questions are, to someone who is kind of on the precipice, so to speak, of wanting to get more involved in the space community, what would be your advice? But since you have this just, history of inspiring entire communities, I would perhaps change that question to, if there is a community leader, if it's a business leader, if it's a politician, if it's a faith leader, and they are trying to instill in their community this sense of, oh, there is something more. Do
Mhm.
you have advice from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think that what's clear to anyone who's paying attention is that systems actually run the world. And those leaders who are sitting in this space, what I would say to them is, let's take a look at the system that is building opportunity in space. And then let's identify an area where you believe you can be most impactful. And then go directly after the people, after the government resources, after the business resources in that area to develop relationships with them. Because what they actually need is you. Because what they don't have is the time and, quite frankly, the inclination to actually do the work that you will do as a leader. So if there's ever an opportunity, and this, it's really simple. We have to think of these kinds of opportunities as being built from the ground to space. And on every single notch or rung, there's someone or there's an institution that is the ladder or is the shoulder that someone needs to stand on. So for me, it's think about what the system is, think about and isolate the area where you actually think is going to be most beneficial for your community, whether it be your church, your mosque, your temple, your synagogue, whatever it is. Think about that space and go deep, because far too often we try to go wide because we actually think the more we do, the more. What I have learned over time is that if you don't go deep, you're actually not going to get anything done. So limit the number of things that you're trying to do. Identify the structure that actually impacts the outcome that you want. Identify the players in that, and then start to talk to the players about what resources in terms of people or opportunities or that you can bring to the table, and start developing those relationships. Because I promise you, what I've learned is that when folks who are playing in that space have a trusted voice and a trusted, they're picking up the phone. They're saying, hey, Nolan, what do you think? Who do you have that can, the old concept of it's who you know, like my grandfather would say it to me all the time, son, you have to develop and build a network so that you not only know people, but that people know you. And I think that these leaders who are sitting in these spaces, they've got to make sure that what's being built recognizes them as a critical component to a successful outcome of that. And I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying that kind of work is necessary. It's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, putting in the work to lay the foundation, so you can actually, the thing that is built on that foundation is something that can last and accomplish what we need it to do. So I know that we're running up fairly close to the allotted time, but I do have a final question. I know you're bouncing all around everywhere, so I'll leave you up to interpretation of where you want to say. But I do always ask people, now that you have these experiences, now that you have impacted these lives, what do you think about, or what do you feel when you look up at the night sky? And what is the night sky where you live or where you are?
It's funny. When I look at the sky now, it's way smaller than it was when I was younger, because I actually understand how much closer it is to me. When I was young, it was way far away. But now that I'm a man and I've actually gone through experiences, I realize how close that sky is to me. And closing that distance is experience and opportunity. That's what closing that. The literal distance has not changed. We are still the same amount of space. It has not changed. But my psychological difference because of experiences has absolutely changed. So I think for me, it's continuing, and it's continuing to do things like Space for Girls. Like that kind of work is really important to me, because it doesn't matter how far I've come in this phase of my professional journey. What matters is in this next phase of my professional journey, what kind of lessons have I learned from the first phase that allow me to turn that motor on and do the similar things in this journey, right? So that's why Space for Girls is important to me, because listen, if we can push an agenda around the importance of having girls engaged in space, girls engaged in STEM, and then doing it in a way where we're connecting girls from California to Nigeria, like that kind of work to me is so incredibly important, because I don't want the day to come, and this is exactly what I was saying before, I don't want the day to come where someone in the space industry says, you know what, I really have an interesting opportunity. I wish I could find a young girl or a woman. I want to be able to say, well, here you go. These young girls have been building CubeSats. These young girls have been doing all kinds of, like, so for me, building that kind of thing, it's the next logical progression to making sure that space can be done and built in an equitable way. So that's how I'm thinking about space now, and that's how I'm thinking about the distance between where I was as a child in space and where I am now in space. It's much closer. It's around the corner. Space is around the corner. It really is.
Excellent. Excellent. I can't think of a better way to wrap it up than that. It's yeah, it is closer than we think. So Nolan, thank you so much for sharing your stories. Thank you so much for sharing your path, and for sharing your expertise, because I know that a lot of people are going to gain a lot of insight and tools from this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And again, I would just say to you, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you've built, and I want to say it on the record. You've built a space that doesn't require anyone to be something that they're not. And that is not something that is readily available in the space, in the place that we're living in humanity. And I think that it is a precious gift. And I'm just honored to be a part of, in whatever way, of this kind of small steps. Like I would just say this: I understand the juxtaposition between small steps and space and all that, but there's nothing small about what you've built.